Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Hi lovely listeners, how are you doing? I've been super chilly this week as the temperature has really dipped and I'm not physically very well equipped to deal with the cold weather. Anyway, in a sense it's been helpful because I've been working on next week's episode about sewing to keep warm and it's made it all the more relevant. This week I even tried out a neck warmer tutorial that I'm including in that episode, but I'll share more about that in due course. So aside from making the neck warmers this week, I also finished up the hoodie that I've been making for my little boy for his birthday. I mentioned it last week, but I'm using the free raglan hoodie pattern by Brindle & Twig. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. They've got it available in 2 size ranges, from newborn to 6 years and 7 years to 14. I decided to use the larger size range pattern because that one has got a crossover hood option in addition to the scuba hood option, and I wanted to give the crossover one a try. So what I did was to print out the pattern of the smallest size at 95%. He won't be trying it until his birthday in a couple of days, so I can't say for sure that it's worked out, but it looks pretty good to me. I've used some stretchy toweling fabric that's been in my stash for a couple of years, plus a scrap of single jersey to line the hood and a scrap of ribbing for the cuffs. I've left the hem band off because I didn't have enough coordinating ribbing and I've just hemmed it, but I've always found that pattern to be quite long in the body anyhow. I've embellished the sweatshirt with an embroidered patch of a Pokemon character, which I hope he's going to love because he's currently obsessed with Pokemon. Also related to sewing and sustainability this week, I made another Instagram video with my boss Josie for Fabric Godmother about sewing more sustainably. So the first video was about reducing waste both as a business and as sewers, and the second one, which came out this week, was about more sustainable haberdashery trims and tool options. I'll link to both of those in the show notes if you haven't seen them, and hopefully you'll find them interesting. The one we made this week, which will come out next week, was about more sustainable fabric production methods. Josie really took the lead on this one because she's way more knowledgeable than myself in this area, and it was really interesting to hear her speak on the topic. I'm really happy to be making these videos for the Fabric Godmother audience because it means that the topic of doing things more sustainably is being brought to a wider section of the sewing community than our little sustainability-minded niche. We've got more in the works, so hopefully we can just keep going and getting people thinking about the changes that they can make, and fingers crossed it'll contribute to a kind of culture shift of sorts within the broader sewing community. Right, so there are no new patrons to thank this week, so instead I'm going to use this chunk of the intro to ask a favour. Please, can you take a minute to leave a rating and review for this podcast in whatever app you listen to Check Your Thread in? If you are able, you could even pop this on pause and take that minute right now. It's a way to help the podcast grow and reach a wider audience, and it is completely free. The number of listeners of this podcast has kind of plateaued over the last few months, and obviously we want increasing numbers of people engaging with how to do things more sustainably. The review doesn't have to be more than one sentence. For example, you could just pick one thing that you like about the podcast and mention that. Maybe something along the lines of, Check Your Thread is full of useful tips and ideas. Or, I love the range of guests that they have, if you do in fact think those things. Thank you so much in advance. So I've been receiving some fantastic ideas from listeners on the topic of sewing on a budget. So next week I'm going to release the Sewing to Keep Warm episode I mentioned, and in the intro I'm going to share all those additional ideas. So if you've got something to add, please contact me via Instagram at checkyourthread or email zoe@checkyourthread.com so I can add yours. Okay, so with no further ado, let's get into today's episode. Oh my goodness, I'm very, very excited for you to listen to this one today. Hopefully, you'll have already heard episode 35 by now, which was about mask making with my friend Sophie Passmore. So Sophie set up the Mask Makers UK community during the pandemic and went on quite a journey with it all. Well, this episode is also with Sophie, but today we're going deep into her life as an artist and all the fascinating ways that she's exploring feminism, female culture, cultural and racial heritage and identity in her work. She works predominantly in the medium of clay, but she's been incorporating the visual languages of various textile traditions into it, and the outcomes are really wonderful. So thanks for giving this one your ears because it means a lot to me, and I hope that you enjoy it. Okay, so now I would really like to talk a bit more about you as a creative person.
Righto.
Because one of the reasons I'm really happy to get to speak to you for the podcast is because sometimes it's difficult. Well, it's not difficult, but like it's not easy to drop in kind of things you want to tell somebody. And now I get to tell you that you are genuinely one of the most creative people that I've ever met.
Oh.
And I might even cry because you've meant so much to me throughout our friendship. And you are genuinely one of the most creative people that I know. And I mean that in a number of ways. And one of the ways that I've really seen that kind of creativity kind of manifest is that you have this, as I see it, this real kind of instinct that when there's something you have figured out that you either need or want, your first instinct, it seems to me, is that you're like, how can I make it? It's not go on Amazon or into the shops. It's like, how can I use what's around me to make it? And I think that is such an incredible impulse. So is that, would you say that's an accurate description?
Yes, it is, because for a number of reasons, but I was trained like that.
Tell me where that's come from. Do you know where that's come from?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think that there's a number of different factors that have fed into that, and that I have a sensitivity to some of them, but mainly it's relational. So so there were specific people that meant a lot to me. That operated in that way. And so I've got a handful of friends who are slightly older women in Canada who were more like mothers or big sisters or aunties. Who are artists themselves and makers, and if something was needed, they would just rock up and make it. And there was no problem with that. There was no flap. There's no flap. I see this as, for example, if we use an example of cloth nappies. So if you've got a cloth nappy in your stash or a handful of them, you're always good. So the idea that you're out somewhere or that you're at home and you've run out of nappies, like disposable diapers, that anxiety about, because it's going to happen. There's going to be another disaster very soon. And this is a necessary thing that we've got to have, and somebody's got to go out there and get them. Or if you've got cloth nappies in your stash, you're fine. You just whack one of those and you just put it through the whatever. So I see it in that way. It's about preparedness. It's about just relax. There's no anxiety about needing anything.
So it's like, it's not a finite resource, like we're good.
It is. It's I see it as all being quite interconnected with a way of walking through the world.
Is there an element of self-reliance in that as well then? You know,
sure.
Like, I don't need businesses, or I don't need the shops, or part of that for you.
I think it's about a relationship with the world, and it's a relationship with the earth and with each other and with oneself. And I think that it really is a kind of a philosophy. It's a mode of operation. And I have found that the more that I'm able to produce the thing that I need when I need it, it's not only a huge sense of accomplishment, but I can also just relax knowing that I've got everything I need. And okay, ask me about my stash of project materials I've got in my house, and or if you talk to my husband, it might be a slightly different story. But I don't know if it's a kind of like prepping. You know, I've got
prepping for life.
I've got all the things that I need, and I absolutely, as I said about the research and development side of things, I absolutely love the challenge of trying to solve a problem, like a practical problem, with what skills and materials I have. And if that means I'm out in the woods and I have to use string and sticks, I quite enjoy that as well. You know, so it's not about having the latest thing. Although it was just my birthday recently, and the kids bought me. They said, "What do you want?" And I said, "Anything that you can buy from the adhesives aisle in the department there is." I love it. in B&Q.
I love it.
So I've got many rolls of patterned duct tape this birthday.
So
happy. And some epoxy. So So I think that it. First of all, I just want to go back and say thank you for your what you've said,
you.
because it felt really nice to hear that, and I really admire the work that you do as well, and your energy that you bring to this, and the communication that you're able to do to inspire others.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that, and I love that about you. And I think that I've been choosing this way of life for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think it started from, in the 80s, getting loads of hand-me-downs and not having a problem with that.
Yeah.
And just going, oh, I could make something out of this.
Yeah.
Bag of clothes that were dropped off at our front door. Oh, I could, doesn't quite fit, but I like the challenge of making it fit.
Yeah.
And so I'm self-taught as a sort of a seamstress, I suppose, and just problem solving.
Yeah.
And innovation.
Yeah.
I love all of that. That's my problem as well. Go out shopping, and everything I look at, I go, I'm not going to buy that. I could make that.
Yeah.
And then my husband goes, wouldn't it be good just to have something new one day, you know? I've got to argue with him about that sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think it really is.
So it's something that was modelled to you early on, and you embraced the challenge, and you embraced that.
Yes, it was modelled to me, and it looked good.
Yeah.
Like
sounds great.
Yeah, like if I saw somebody wearing a bunch of janky stuff, and they were all like hairy and smelly, and whatever negative associations I could put on a person walking through the world, but it was the opposite of that.
Yeah.
I really admired and loved these people. And even my grandmother, you know, she'd come through the war. They'd moved from Canada, from the UK, and make do and mend. You know, she was very able, and very self-sufficient. She had 9 children. You know, she was able to really make the most of it. And it was her attitude as well. Yeah, because she had a very positive outlook, very supportive. Yeah, you know, well done, etc. Oh, and that, I think that all of those ingredients and all of those constellations, you know, they were the ingredients in the big soup that that had become me. And so I associate them positively, and I associate things like, you know, ability and strength and fortitude and resilience, and again, this is what aligns me with my feminism. Yeah, because that belief that I hold about this picture, about these people, about myself, if I hold that over top of the idea of what it means to be feminine and what it means to be a woman today in our, you know, the status quo, they don't line up. Yeah. They don't seem to line up. And I reject that because, as my mom said, you know, there's a million ways to be a woman. Yeah. And the way that I am a woman, it works just fine for me. And I so love and appreciate all of the other ways that people are women and are themselves, you know? Yeah. And I think it takes great bravery, and I think it creates a more healthy society when we can find a way that resonates with us, each of us, to be who we are. Yeah, and then other things like competition and expectation, they can kind of just melt away a bit. Absolutely. And I don't this is my own personal view on it, is that my feminism and my worldview is also at odds with capitalism in general, as a big sweeping statement. And I don't find that many of the pitfalls with having to buy the new thing every 3 years and having to chuck things out when they break, and I get quite cross when things do break quickly and they aren't made to last. But I just find that my worldview is really kind of taking me down a different path. And I choose, and I'm curating the people and the life that I have to support that. Yeah. And I absolutely love how it feels like a community. And that's what I love about the sewing community. Yeah. People are so willing. It's one of the nicest places on the internet. Agreed. And so if I can, you know, put myself into that space. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm really pleased that, for example, the mask making journey you've been on has kind of meant that you've become part of that. Yes. And those lovely benefits. Yes. Yeah. Because I wasn't really a part of that world before. Because sewing for you has been a tool. Correct. Yeah. I'd say rather than correct. The focus necessarily of your creativity, it's something you can turn to. That's right. Yes. Yeah. And although it's become, my sewing machine is now permanently set up. in my workspace, and I have so much fabric everywhere. So I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah,
still, so
amazing. Okay, so I love that at the top of this that you introduced yourself as both a maker and an artist, because I really see both of those things really strongly in you. Obviously, as a maker, you know, you turn to your abilities to produce things for fulfilling your needs and your wants. But also, like, as an artist, there's been so many times when we've had conversations, you know, we've been talking about something really important like feminism and motherhood or something. And in those conversations, you've kind of almost like brainstormed like a way that the points that we're making could kind of take form as almost like an art piece or something.
Yeah.
And I really love that, because that's not an impulse that I have. I'm much more makey, practical. I don't necessarily think about the message in that way. I think about it, but I don't necessarily, my impulse isn't to manifest it in that way.
Yeah.
So I love that. I love seeing that in you, and I love seeing it when that pops up in you. So can you tell us about some of the artwork that you're doing at the moment? Because I know that you've got some really cool projects on the go at the moment.
Thanks. Yeah, great. I'm happy to. I think that a lot of the things that I make are associated to wanting to communicate ideas about. A lot of the times it's like there's a fire in my belly about wanting things to change. Like, I want to change things, that things need to be different, you know. And so brainstorming loads of ideas about how women's clothing can change to facilitate our needs, the needs of our bodies. I made a whole series of conspicuous breastfeeding tops when the children were tiny, and I wanted to make it like, you know, almost like arrows, like open here, like have a hatch, as opposed to it being secret and private necessarily, things like that. Also, you know, dungarees that could open with a fly, but for women, you know, you can use some kind of a shiwi to, you know, because who wants to get completely undressed just to have a wee?
Completely.
You know? Now that full jumpsuits are really popular right now, really
but you have to
comfortable.
get freezing cold to go for a wee.
You have to get completely, exactly. And what's so funny is so many of my rants and very energetic and lively brainstorming sessions will lead me to a place where I feel like I've got, it's a really great idea where I'm going to make this thing. And I have done. So right now I'm making a series of ceramic shiwis.
Yes.
And they're not the most practical in the sense that you would take it with you everywhere and that you would use it when you need it. They do function. And they're actually meant to be like beautiful pieces of art in themselves, because they're glazed and they're hand painted, and some of them have gold luster on them. What they're meant to be is an object of kind of like pride in a way. Like, this is accoutrement that is female, and this is something that is primarily for the use of our body, for whatever way I deem, and for whatever reason I deem. Yes, I'm curious about what it feels like to piss standing up, you know. Sometimes you're just in a practical situation where you just really need to have a quick wee and you can't get completely undressed. Maybe you're in a car or something like that.
Or camping.
Festivals, things like that. So there are these, again, there's that practical element. There is problem solving there. But for me, I wanted it to be about, culture.
Yeah.
And I really believe that female culture could be so much richer than what the status quo says that we're meant to be. Otherwise, we feel shame if we're not a part of that, what somebody else says we're meant to be. So, I got this thing, and it's a bit weird.
Yeah, and maybe you just have it on your shelf, and it invites curiosity and discussion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is that I share a studio, I share a ceramic studio, and the proprietor of the studio he's a master potter, actually. He's a Sicilian master potter, Roberto Gagliano. And bless him, I have these objects coming through the kilns. And
what's his reaction?
At first, there was a little bit of hesitancy, sort of curiosity, actually.
Yeah.
You know, he'd say, what is this thing that you're making?
I mean, he must have seen so many things in his time as a ceramicist, and then like, I haven't seen this before.
Yes, yeah. Well, so it was curiosity, and And I tried to sort of protect him at first. We have a very friendly, very supportive relationship. And I said, I'm not sure that you really want to know all about this, but I'll tell you if you do.
Yeah.
Said, okay. So I told him what it was, and he said, oh, actually, just keep it to yourself. That's absolutely fine. And it reminded me of the same reaction I got growing up when it had anything to do with periods and menstruation.
Really?
And my brother and other young men would go, oh, I don't want to hear about this. That's like girl body, female stuff. It's private, it's secret, it's taboo, it's kind of gross. Don't even talk to me.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? How much of male body function culture stuff do we know about?
Yeah.
American Pie. How many films have been made about what's going on for men in their bodies? And
how many films there are about periods, about running out of tampons? Like none.
Yeah. And okay, don't even get me started about access, to period products.
That's a whole nother thing.
That's a whole nother
thing.
So what we're talking about is female culture, and as far as I'm concerned, it's inclusive. So anybody who wants to be involved in female culture and who wants to identify, I'm totally there for that, all of that. But it needs to, again, like my Mass Making UK group, it needs to stay friendly and supportive. As soon as you start getting hating on somebody else, you're out of there.
You're out.
But,
brilliant.
So there's the Shiwis, and I wanted to develop a line of, I wanted to decorate a whole load of vacuum cleaners, of Hoovers, like, Mad Max cars, spray paint them and put loads of like spikes on them and have them be art pieces to talk about domesticity and women's work and division of labor.
Yeah.
I really want to get, and I'm not inventing the wheel here. This comes after a huge line of feminist artists who've been saying much of the same thing. For me, it just feels like it aligns with just who I am and how I think about the world and how I walk through the world. But right now, I'm creating a series of ceramic vases, and again, this was me studying under Roberto, because this is his gift and his skill is to make these really classically shaped, beautiful vases.
They're pretty big as well.
Pretty big. They're very big. Some of them are gigantic. So I've been studying under him for a few years now. And because I found that if you make a really beautiful, classically shaped vase, anything you put on it, it's just going to become... It just holds the space in such a powerful way. Like
a canvas.
It really is. It holds its space, its own space.
And people know how to interact with that. They're used to that form and how they go about that and view it and interact with it.
Yes. So, I mean, there are loads of artists that have used this medium as well. Grace and Perry and like loads of other people who put all sorts of challenging imagery on top of these vases. And
I want to hear about the ones that you're doing that have a real connection to textiles and textile traditions.
Yes. So, I toyed with them being quite iconoclastic and quite punk rock and but doing all of that work and all of that thinking and all of that feeling about it, it just kept kind of coming background to a much more personal experience. A really personal expression of sort of investigating who I am, who my people are, who my ancestors are.
So tell us about that.
And so my heritage is very mixed. So my father was English, and my mother comes from a very mixed background. So her father was Norwegian, and then her mother was Chilean and Native Indian, Coast Salish from British Columbia, Canada. So those traditions are all so different, and they have such strong visual traditions and cultures and everything. And being raised in Canada, which is we're not a melting pot. Canada, contrasting the American melting pot idea where everyone just becomes American.
Yeah.
In Canada, there was more of this emphasis of an idea of a tapestry, that we were all these different cultures of the world that create this rich, sort of varied place that is Canada. And of course, being where I am now in this time, in this place in history, a view of colonialism and imperialism, when we look back on how this whole story has played out of power, And
it's not as pretty as a tapestry.
It's not
is
as
it?
pretty as a tapestry, and the white and the European elements certainly get more prominence. And my grandmother and her family have a whole very, very interesting story of what it was to be from Vancouver.
Yeah,
my mother's since the beginning of time, or since there were people there, were from Vancouver.
Right.
And these people were displaced, and Vancouver is now one of the least affordable housing markets on earth. It's the second least affordable housing market on earth. And to me, there's so much wrong with that.
Yeah.
This is literally my ancestral home, and I can't afford to live there.
Yeah.
And many of my mum's family don't live there and can't live there either. We're just priced out. Artists, people, normal people are priced out. And so just the story of how Vancouver happened, and interestingly that my granny met, an intriguing young Norwegian man, and he's got his whole family's story. It's just, to me, I'm finding it to be really fascinating.
Yeah.
Investigating these histories, and trying to pull out the pieces that might inform me about who I am.
So when you were growing up, it sounds like you've been doing a lot of kind of research and stuff as an adult, but when you were growing up, kind of which of those kind of traditions and heritages did you feel was kind of the more dominant or the strongest influence for you?
Yeah, it's a really interesting process that I'm still in the middle of.
Sure.
Being from, again, a multicultural family, because I've married somebody who's Dutch Welsh, and I've left my country and my family, and I've moved thousands of miles here to have my children and to settle. And so this just the theme of emigrating and being new and being a foreigner. So I speak the same language, and I present as white, so I've got a real foothold on, settling and establishing myself in Britain. I'm doing great. And, but certainly growing up, the whole concept, the whole idea of having one parent who's got this set of values and parenting and life tacts, and then another parent that has and may have sometimes complementary, but sometimes very different set, with a whole different family and system. And to have just the contrast, it has been both brilliantly enriching and confusing. Right. And I think that it really is the sort of the state of where we're all at now in the West, especially, where we've just got so much choice.
Yeah.
When it comes to parenting, which set of parenting instructions do I follow? This whole element which says to do everything or that whole element. They contradict each other, but they both come from traditions that are backed up by science.
Yeah.
And So that's been kind of my family experience, is just to have so many varying forms of tradition and advice, but sometimes strict orders and whatever, and just kind of navigating. I think it's just about being agile and just kind of finding my own way through it and trying to find my own self through it.
Yeah.
And
so interesting that on top of that, you had these other female kind of role models and figures as well. So that's like almost like another layer as well, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. I joined a number of different families.
Yeah.
So I joined my friend's family, I joined another friend's family, and now I've joined my husband's family. So I think I'm quite used to seeing how other people do it and kind of going, oh, okay. And instead of going like, oh, it wasn't like that for me, or we do it better at home, or whatever, I really feel like the mission or the goal has been to try and find, novel ways of doing things and to appreciate them. And it is objective, but it's also, we're doing this together.
Yeah.
There's no one way to do it. And again, there's a million ways to be a woman.
Yeah.
There's a million ways to have family and to do community. And I bring my safety with me. So no matter where I go, it's going to be fine.
So you've been doing so much exploring, and it's so fascinating that each of those kind of elements that you were talking about, for example, your kind of native culture and Britain and Norwegian and stuff, they've all got really strong textile traditions as well,
Yes.
haven't they?
Yes.
So there's that real visual element, and as an artist, I'm sure you're very sensitive to that.
Yes, exactly. So my big classical shaped pots have been decorated with weaving traditions, weaving motifs from these various visual cultures. And I'm kind of just moving along down the line. I've still got a few to go, but I'm really enjoying the process, and I'm finding them to be really meaningful to me.
Yeah.
And I'm really enjoying investigating the different shapes, again, the motifs, and interestingly, there are so many crossovers.
Really?
So there's lots of obviously very geometric designs and high contrast, and the way that those translate onto the medium of the ceramic surface, it's really wonderful, because the body of the ceramic, and we literally call the pot, it's the body of the ceramic, the clay.
Oh, and the clothing goes on a body.
Exactly, and the way that we talk about the visual language is it's the shoulder, it's the foot.
Oh,
and
cool.
So it started with a whole series of pots that wear these little sweaters, woolly jumpers.
Yeah.
And they were Norwegian sweaters.
Yeah.
Because I just love those. After seeing The Killing, you know how she was like,
yeah,
gotta have me one of those sweaters. And so I'm decorating those pots with these little sweaters, and people recognize them straight away because it's in our shared visual culture.
Yeah.
And people really do have that kind of, they're friendly, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they're like cozy.
Cozy, yeah.
So, but I've been really interested in the Fair Isle knitting and the Cowichan knitting. So Cowichan is a group of a band on the northwest Pacific coast of Canada. They are a specific. They fall under the big umbrella of Coast Salish.
Okay.
So Coast Salish is the group. It represents many groups of native tribes, so to speak, First Nations, along the Pacific Northwest coast of Canada. And, I mean, these are completely separate language groups.
Right.
These aren't dialects. These are completely separate groups of people. Very sophisticated visual culture, different cultures. And in the Cowichan Valley on Vancouver Island, they were using dog hair, actually. So they had these little white dogs with long hair, and they were being cultivated, and they were their pets, but they would
brush them.
So they were white, but they used a color scheme of white, grey, and black, and blanketing and blankets were of the utmost importance. In fact, they were the currency. It's a very powerful symbol to have the motifs, a high contrast, but of course blankets are so important with regards to just staying alive.
Yeah. Which it kind of has parallels with like quilting traditions as well, doesn't it?
Certainly, yes. And what I love about that, it is so female. And so these were commodities because they were traded and they were considered amongst the highest value items, commodities to be traded amongst peoples. And when there were ceremonies, when there were celebrations, potlatches, people would families would gift amongst each other of these items of high value. And they were female. They were female made. All of the steps of the process were female led. This was a very respected industry. And it still is today.
Yeah.
All over the world, weaving is a female industry. Like, certainly there are loads of men involved, but the actual doing and the spinning of the wool and just all of these processes, there's just a relationship with each of these processes that is so much of one's intention goes into it, and it's not just about doing a boring job for a long time. There's a mind state that's involved. It's very meditative.
Yeah.
I think it's connected to wellness. It's connected to the way that we respect and move through the earth. You know, when we're spinning, when we're gathering our resources to make these items, we're not slashing and burning.
Yeah.
And I don't know why it feels so very female to do it in a sustainable way. Yeah. To harvest things in a way that's respectful.
Yeah.
And then
and literally sustainable. Like, it can be sustained. I'm
Absolutely.
not slash and burning. It's like I'm caring for these dogs will continue to produce. I'm not killing them, I'm using their excess. Yeah.
There's a nurturing there. And that is very indigenous, that relationship with the resources, with the earth, with each other. We say all my relations, which means that you're respectful of your place within the context of your community, and that the way that you move through the world is, it's respectful to everyone else, and you're doing your best basically within the rules. Now the rules have to do with protocol and ceremony,
right? And
those are developed in order to ensure that proper practice is carried out. So
right.
When it comes to gathering resources, when it comes to picking berries, when it comes to fishing, you're following protocol, which is set up by ceremony and practiced in the same way over and over again, so that you know that your practice is in line with a way that's sustainable.
Yeah.
And these are such old practices, but saying all of that, in Canada, a lot of that was wiped out and a lot of that was forgotten. So it has had a regeneration, and there has been continuation in loads of places where people have survived, where groups of people up north and in remote communities. But I mean, these practices weren't allowed for a long time, and there was a lot of shame. So, to go back to the question you asked earlier about which culture I practiced as a child growing up, this was in the 80s. Mm-hmm. It wasn't cool to be Indian back then. It still wasn't cool to be a native person back then.
Right.
Because there was so much stigma attached to being native, which was the dominant culture in Canada. You go to America, all of the prisons are filled with black men, and if you go to Canada, the prisons are filled with native men.
Right.
Just that isn't because black men and native men are inherently bad and wrong and criminal. It's a systemic injustice that is racist. So our family, we had the opportunity, my father being an Englishman, it seemed like the right and best practice way to go. So it was like, we're going to learn how to be proper little English kids and cups of tea. So this is what I'm working through right now with my practice on my pots.
Yeah.
I want to know what else is going on. Who else is in there?
Yeah.
What else is informing, the story? And I'm really, really enjoying it. And the sweaters have really connected with people.
Yeah.
I'm wanting to be really sensitive and really aware of the fact that I'm borrowing the Cowichan sweater design.
Right. Yeah. I was going to ask you, how does that work? Because you're saying there's these specific protocols and stuff. How does that extend?
Yeah. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to a few artists in the Cowichan Nation and speak to them and at least talk to them about what I'm doing, and because I am using the motifs of their weaving. And so the reason why the Cowichan sweater is significant is because it's become iconic for the west coast of Canada. Mm-hmm. So in the 20s and 30s, up to the 50s, and to today, the Cowichan sweater, black, grey, white, thick woolly jumper, with lots of sort of snowflake motifs, sometimes animals like salmon and bears and orcas. And these have become so a symbol of the west coast of Canada that when the Queen Elizabeth visited in 1974 or whatever, she was gifted Cowichan sweaters because it sort of represented the place. And when the Olympics came, they made these fake Cowichan sweaters for the Olympic team, and they sell for hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Yeah. Armani made a knockoff. Ralph Lauren made a knockoff. And there's been quite a furor over it, over this, because of appropriation and just power balance.
Yeah, what, profiteering from,
absolutely. Yeah. So I want to be on the right side of, with my practice. I want to be acknowledging and respectful of the fact that where they've come from, and my claim to any indigeny. As an indigenous person, as a Norwegian person, as a Chilean person, as an English person, as a Canadian person, I'm all of these things. Yeah. And I don't claim to represent anyone.
Yeah.
You know, I don't claim to represent anyone other than myself.
Yeah.
But I do want to be aware of the visual language that I'm using and how and why I'm using it.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of people are sort of, they see the pot and they recognize the couch and sweater and they go, oh, that's us somehow.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
But so the couch and sweater is called an acculturated art form. It's a combination of Fair Isle technique. So the knitters from Scotland moved to Vancouver Island. I've forgotten her name. There's an actual person that we can connect this to. She taught how to rear sheep and use sheep's wool. And then the spinning techniques were used from the First Nations.
Oh, wow.
The colour scheme was used from the First Nations. Knitting was used from the Scottish knitters. And then the children were taught how to knit in residential school. They were knitting and they were presenting at the World's Fair. It's just this whole wonderful story.
Wow.
Really painful as well.
Yeah.
Sort of, colonialist power bullshit. Absolutely. But it's what is resulted in is something that is really recognisable.
Yeah.
But it's got a whole story to tell.
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Now, but it's really excited me.
So amazing. Well, thank you so much. Sophie, this has been so amazing. Thank you so, so much. Thank you for telling me all of that, because I know obviously it's stuff that you've been working on, but I'm so excited that I got to hear the broader context. So thank you so much for your time, for sharing all of that.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. Thank you for asking me to come on.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!